In this session of the Purple Coffee Podcast, I speak to Chris Brogan about the dangers of expanding too quickly and having too many fingers in too many honeypots. If you know what I mean. Hello and welcome to session 24 of the Purple Coffee Podcast, inspiring stories from creative entrepreneurs. I am your host, Turndog, and on this occasion I interview and chat to the wonderful and extremely inspiring Chris Brogan, who I am almost certain you have heard of. Basically, when you start up an online world of any kind, he's one of the people you tend to flock towards first. He's been there, he's done it, he has lots of advice for people like you and me. He's an absolute true gent, and I'm so happy to have him involved in The Successful Mistake, a book I'm writing about an entrepreneur's grand faux pas and how they turned it around. I've now started writing this book, so I'm excited to share that with you in the not too distant future. Chris also happened to be one of the first people I reached out to, and surprisingly, he said yes. At the time I was surprised, but now after knowing him, I'm not one bit so. He's very helpful, he's very cool, and I'm exceptionally excited to share his insight with you. Now, Chris could have talked about many stories and many mistakes because he's been doing this for rather a long time. When you've been doing it for a long time, you have lots of memories to draw upon. But his was all about expanding too quickly and trying to do too much at once. When you're starting out in a business, this is far too easy to get into. Maybe things aren't working out, so you need to try several things to see which one will work. Maybe things are going well, so you think, hey, if this is going well, I can expand and diversify into this, that, and the other, and that too will work. Whichever the way, it will often lead to brand confusion. This is exactly what Chris discovered. Something he talked about in the conversation, which I really enjoyed, was having a bit of an intention to what you do. If you have that intention going forward and every message that you share is continuous and aligned with a bigger picture, then good things will happen. But if you try and do too much in too many various different ways, then people will be confused as what you bring to the table. And in the end of the day, when you start a business, you want to be known for being great at one or two things. That's what Chris learned. But I'll stop talking because he has some fine words to share with you and he can explain them far better than I. Oh yeah. Now, I'm sure you have heard of Chris Brogan, but just in case you haven't, I've prepared a little something on my iPhone. It's a little story that I've written, especially for him, a take on his about page, if you will. So, without further ado, here is Chris in all his glory. Chris Brogan equips business owners with the tools to succeed, which may, if you're anything like me, have you picturing an ironmonger forging tools and out of hot metals and fire, or a handyman maybe walking around town with a toolbox and a work belt, like handy-manny. Well, don't allow your imagination to rule like mine does, because Chris looks nothing like handy-manny. For starters, he isn't a cartoon, and for secondaries, he equips folk like your good self with far more powerful, intangible tools to grow your world. Simple put, he's a man in the know and one you should follow if you need guidance and help. He's been there. He cares. He's a damn inspiration and a real human boy. Unlike that sneaky little handy-manny. Yeah, you've been warned. Okay, thank you very much for joining us. I am delighted to be speaking to a marvellous man today, and this week's Turndog Talks 2 is with Chris Brogan, the well-known blogger and someone who I speak to quite a lot through email and on comments and what have you, but this is the first time we've met face-to-face. So thank you very much, Chris, for joining us.
It's my honor to be here. Thanks for having me, Matthew.
Well, I'm sure most people watching this will know all about Chris's story, but just in case, Chris, would you be able to very briefly tell us who you are and what you're all about?
Well, sure. I'm the CEO and president of a company called Human Business Works. We're a business design company that does publishing and education to help professionals of all sizes really figure out how to develop a vision, a plan, and a community of support to do the work that they want to do. What does that mean? It just means that I help people communicate better. I help them build better community-minded, relationship-based business practices from stem to stern, everything from prospecting to selling to service. I come at this from a history of my background before any of this silliness was telecom and wireless telecom and technology, but I have been involved in social media type things and marketing and blogging. I started blogging back in 1998 when they were calling it journaling. And so all along the way, I've just picked up tips and ideas and done a lot of strategy work and execution to see what works and doesn't. And I suppose that's why people have me in for tea.
Fantastic. Well, this interview is all for the successful mistakes. There we go, my bright, shiny new leaflet which just came in the other day. So it's all about trying to unearth what the mistakes that entrepreneurs and business owners have made, and more importantly, how they overcame them. So Chris was actually one of the people who I emailed quite early on in the process and asked for some feedback, and he gave me some fantastic ones. So I'm very excited to hear his thoughts on this. So let's kick this off in the best way possible, Chris. What is your biggest business mistake? And tell us the tale. What happened?
So I would say that I have one easy failure that sort of precludes everything, and that's that I'm naturally good at most things that I do, and I don't say that to brag. I say that cautionary as a cautionary consideration, because when you're naturally pretty good at things, you can bite off a lot more than you can chew, and you tend not to believe the prevailing wisdom. So my biggest mistake that I made so far in my business career would be around 2011, where I just really believed that I could throw ideas and creativity and money at a bunch of different ideas and projects and make them all work. Now, what everyone tells you as an entrepreneurial type is really ride the horse that you're on, really be on this one project and really stay invested in it, and you'll do well. And instead, what I did was I went all over the place, and I tried a lot of different things and launched a lot of different little projects. And of course, that made that I couldn't focus. I didn't exactly have the infrastructure to do sorts of many projects at once like that. And I ended up losing about $400,000 of my own money, which it wasn't like I just had a lot of money laying around. It just means that for whatever I was earning, I was burning it faster than I could keep it in a bank.
And that's a considerable amount of money for anyone, really. It is a lot of money, and it's hard because that's probably about a year ago, maybe just a little over a year.
Mm-hmm.
And you're obviously quite a successful person. You've been building up for quite a few years, and you get confident in what you're doing, and you think to an extent that you get this sort of Superman complex. And I think a lot of people go through this. And a few of the people I've been connecting with recently have told me about them stories. Sometimes when you need to be at your most cautious is when the success is riding high.
You know, it's not that I think I should have been cautious so much as I just think nothing good comes of being ADD with your business pursuits. You're welcome to have a lot of different ideas and all that, but you really should put them into some sort of a nest and let them grow a little bit before you launch them all over the world. So in doing what I was doing, I mean, I was a blend of a professional speaker. I was writing books. I was consulting to very large companies, doing some work with some individuals and small business as well, started building some software projects, started building a media project where I thought I could maybe put together some kind of a digital magazine with a lot of different producers and creators. And I kept thinking all of these things out there will mean that something will hit and it'll work rather well. So I guess I wouldn't characterize what I should have done different to be cautious. I should have really just put all that energy into something solid in just one direction. And then I think clarity of message would have been better. I think people would have had a much better sense of understanding what I was all about. But also I think that through that process, it's really what led me to grow and understand a little bit more where I was heading next. So I guess I wouldn't take it back, although it does sort of sting to not have a whole lot of money uh, and lose plenty of money at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Scary time. Did you find that the people who knew you maybe had been involved with you for a long time, did it confuse them because you were getting well known for doing A, B, and C, and all of a sudden you're doing, X, Y, and Z? Did it confuse? Did it like have a bit of a sort of misperception towards your brand, what you'd built?
Oh, what a great question. It is. I would say that for quite a while now, people haven't really understood how to explain me. They'll be at a party or something and say, "Oh, Chris Brogan, yeah, well, he speaks, he writes, he consults, he works with really big and small." But so there was a real brand confusion over what I was doing and what I was selling. And in fact, when I went and made my more recent turn in the road, so to speak, and decided I wanted to work with professionals of all sizes and not so much consult anymore with big companies, although I don't turn it down because it's great checks. I found that people were, it was the opposite problem. They were like, well, you seem to work with all these companies like Coca-Cola and Microsoft. Why would you work with just me? And I said, oh, I have to find some way to make this all work. So I'll tell you that the way I do things, because I tend to be a predominantly online and digital person, is I used my website to recommunicate that. So I rebuilt chrisbrogan.com and then right after humanbusinessworks.com to really tell the story of what I'm doing and my brand in a very consistent way. And almost immediately after people get over gee, this is a good looking site. I didn't design it, so I can brag about it. Once they get over it's pretty, they can tell my story very well. And that's, I think, the goal, because we're all usually pretty good at telling our own story. It's what people say when we're not around that we hope is nearly consistent with who we are and what we're doing.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because you said you started blogging in 98, is it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sure.
So that's pushing on 15 years ago, and your site and the way that you communicate yourself, it's still evolving.
Oh yes, it'll never end. I mean, there's nary a person who owns a website that immediately thinks that the design is perfect and they'll want to stay there forever. I was so thrilled with chrisbrogan.com before this change, and I was just like, this is the best site ever. And I went more than a year thinking that. But I mean, normally professional bloggers tend to think every 6 months, maybe even every 4 months. Oh, it just looks old. We say this horrible thing. It looks old, even though it's only 4 months. But I think it's just because if you're doing it for a business, you're also trying to see what's going to work well, what's going to convert, how are you going to get more people to pay attention, and that's the other thing I had to reinstall into my brand was, what did I really want people to do when they got to my website, chrisbrogan.com, and then also eventually what would they do at HBW. And with Chris Brogan and more or less HBW, I really want people to sign up for my newsletter, because I feel like once you get a taste of who I am, you either opt out of that experience entirely and say, oh, this is not for me, or you buy into it totally, and then you become someone who may or may not be a prospect.
Well, I certainly recommend sign up to that newsletter. It pops into my inbox every Sunday, and if for anything else, I always learn about a new different type of tea. And being from Yorkshire, I thought I knew about every kind of tea going, because if there's two drinks that we know, it's tea and beer. So you've certainly sort of widened my perspective with tea.
Well, not to get on a side note, but it's really interesting. My girlfriend, Jacqueline Carley, decided that she was going to get into the tea business. And after pursuing it and really doing the research and a lot of serious conversation, we decided not to do it. But in the process, she went out and met like the expert currently on tea, at least in the US. His name is James Norwood Pratt, and he's been all over the world, and he is just truly the most knowledgeable person on tea live right now, and has written what counts as sort of the Bible about it. I also met on the other side of the equation, I'm going to blank on his name, Jesse something, from Samovar Tea, which was a startup that was started in San Francisco in the US. And he was taking tea to this concept of, it's too fussy and too fancy. There should be some ritual to it, but it should also be something that we are bringing to as sort of a day-to-day experience. On the other side of this third person has popped up who runs David's Tea, and I'm also blanking on his last name, but obviously his first is David. And his intention, he's been building these tea shops all over Canada, and his intention is that it'll be as ubiquitous as Starbucks fairly shortly. And so I'm excited to see that possibility happen. Seeming he's opening a new store about every 7 days.
Wow.
So it's strange that this drink that you know quite well is also this huge entrepreneurial engine that people really wouldn't expect, but seems to be at the tip of the tongue of a lot of different entrepreneurial types right now.
It does seem to be a bit of a buzz. It's funny you mention it. There's a couple of tea shops that have opened up fairly close to me in Leeds, and they don't just do tea; they do coffee and everything. But it does seem to have a bit of a buzz at the minute, and it's funny how we get in these cycles. And who knows? Maybe the next Starbucks will be, tea books. Who knows? So, going back to the mistake of growing very fast and trying all these different things, what did you learn from it? Because you've got all these years of experience, you've worked with massive companies, small companies, you've spoken at some of the biggest events going. Surely people would think he's learned everything there is. But still, just a year or so ago, there's something that comes along, it knocks you for six, and I'm sure there were lessons learned. What were they?
Well, it's a wonderful question, and no, I think we learn all the way up until we're in the box. Hopefully, we're learning on the way out the box too. And you fall down dead as you just discovered that perhaps the gun was loaded. But I would say that lessons learned, things that I've gone about doing a little bit differently is that first off, work with a lot more intention. Especially when we're younger, I think we tend to believe that we have all the hours we'll ever need and that we could waste them very frivolously. But what I've come to really discover is that the more we can really work on our intention of what we really want to do and how we actually want our lifestyle to be, we'll spend less time thinking about projecting, planning ahead and all that, and actually living where we are in a space. And I know that sounds like such a you only live once, teenagers on surfboards kind of stuff. But I really mean it in a business sense as well. I mean that we tend to really frivolously waste our time on things that seem busy but aren't important. And that's one big lesson I had. And so to stick to what matters the great deal to me, what is the most important part of my business, I just have a lot of actual physical written reminders around me, notes on sticky paper and things like that I keep right handy to remind myself what my priorities are, where I'm putting all my effort, etc. Into that same line, where do I define those priorities? I was sitting with Brian Clark on stage at some event. Brian Clark is copy blogger and runs Copy Blogger Media, this software company that started out of a blogging career. And I said to Brian, I said, how do you avoid the problem I'm in right now? And he said, well, I just always think, is this something that my primary community needs? And if the answer is no, then I just don't do the project. Doesn't matter how interesting or intriguing or fun it is. If it doesn't actually feed my community, I don't do it. And that sounds so simple. Like that sounds like such simple advice, but if you're kind of not sure who your community is, if you haven't really done the work to identify the persona underneath them, then it's a lot harder to understand how you will serve them, what's going to be of value to them, and where you should spend your hours. I mean, if your community, for instance, wants to do much better at tennis or golf or something, is really writing about it a lot going to help them, or is creating better video going to help them? Are interviewing experts going to help them, or is making an app that helps them keep better track of their scores or whatever going to help them? These are the ways that you could start understanding what would be helpful. So that's another really huge situation to me, that opportunity. Finally, just to clear that off, I think that the third thing I'll give you for a good takeaway is that I guess if we work really hard towards putting together things that we think are going to be helpful, we have to give every bit of our attention to how we're going to promote that, how we're going to let it live, how we're going to see it through. I had this mistake. I continuously have this mistake that I am Sir Richard Branson, thus the beard, and I actually have somewhat longer hair. And Sir Richard's my absolute business idol. And with over 400 companies, the one thing that Sir Richard has is a lot of humans that he can then really put a room together, really get them to explain an idea well, and and send them on their way, and then people run with that. And I have two humans in my company, and neither one is actually doing what I do. They just help me do what I do better. And so I learned that I have to actually be there for the entire birth and life cycle of the product or whatever I'm working on. And in the past, I wasn't doing that sort of a thing.
Okay. I think that is a key thing because, like you say, you don't have this company that has 2,000 employees, so you're able to get very hands-on with everything that goes on. But I suppose it's a balancing act, learning to make sure you don't do too much and you do delegate when you need to and you do outsource, but also being sort of there for the whole process because it is your baby.
Right. Well, so I mean, the way I look at that. Just this is probably a better way to explain that long-winded answer I just gave. Having someone follow up to make sure that for the book release for the Impact Equation, my new book, one of the things I did was I had a pre-order campaign that I built myself where I said, if you buy the book and show me the receipt for the book, I will give you a free Amazon or Nook book of any kind you want, limit $25, because it turns out there are some ebooks that cost a ton. And then I said, if you bought 10 books, I'd buy you a Kindle Fire HD or a Nook to give away if you wanted to do some kind of a giveaway project. And if you bought 20 books, I would invite you to a private event that no one can get in unless they buy 20 books. Well, that's great. I made that project, and then I gave it to my guy, Ron, to actually coordinate, make sure people got what they wanted. And then I realized that if I don't actually, Ron's very efficient and does things very well, but if I don't sort of keep myself up on it, then I won't know how he's doing, and I won't be sure and clear of what's on the go.
It's very true because you still need to obviously manage the process and make sure it's ticking along. So I'm sure everyone watching this will be very keen because the big thing you said at the beginning, everyone's always going to focus on the money because that's just how humans work. Big money, $400,000. How did you overcome it? The financial strain, the emotional strain in particular. Obviously, you've learned a lot of lessons from it, but how did you overcome it in the weeks and months that rumbled on around this time?
So, I mean, the thing about losing $400,000 is it's very similar to that. How do you cook a frog? They 1 degree at a time, and you just don't notice. So the truth is, it wasn't like I was just one day and I took my wallet out and said, "Okay, here's 400," because that would have killed me. I would have been dead. And no one has. Well, I mean, wealthy people, I guess, but we don't just have that laying around. So. It was over time. It was, let's do this project. Okay, let's do that project. And I don't pay very close attention to my books. I have someone for that. And I just finally said, where are we with anything? And when we got the real deep conversation about that, that was a little tricky. So what I ended up doing with that, what I ended up doing to cope with it is what I always do. I've never learned how to handle money. Like I've never learned how to save very well. And I've always done the same trick, which is just work harder and dig my way back out of the hole. It's a little hard to whinge and complain if you're working even harder. And by the way, I mean, I was already working as hard as I thought I could. But there's no better motivation than you can't pay your mortgage. To work faster and harder. So, and I had to lay off some people. It's the first time I've ever had to do that in my life. It felt like a horrible failure. But in the process, what I've done is one of them, I've really helped find some more business. The other one, I was able to introduce to a few other people for some more jobs. And in all other situations, it also reminded me of another English person, Felix Dennis, who wrote an incredible book called How to Get Rich, where he just reminded you that overhead walks on 2 feet. And the fact that the more people you can not hire, the better your success opportunities might well be.
Fantastic. Well, we are edging toward the end now, so I'm hoping you'll be able to just finish this little interview off by offering one piece of advice to a young/new entrepreneur, someone just starting out. What sage words can Chris Brogan offer?
I have 2 things. And first off, the way that I've made all the money I've ever made in my life and the way that I continue to be successful is to just answer this all the time. Just be helpful. That doesn't mean ask how you can help. Create things that are helpful to others. The other is that I think, especially with younger entrepreneurs and younger business people in general, we make the horrible mistake of thinking that the entire social structure we created in our teenage years and our early university experiences is what's going to get us through. And networking is the absolutely least taught experience that you need to do. You need business networking. You need to follow books like Keith Ferrazzi, Never Eat Alone. I can highly recommend Tim Sanders' book, Love is the Killer App. And oddly enough, Tim was trying to call me at the mid part of this interview because we have a call shortly thereafter. And you really need to start working on your networking. And by networking, this isn't what you've been taught. This isn't shake hands, exchange cards, follow up, and try to sell the other person something fast. It's really looking for avenues of value. You have to do it in the physical space. You have to do it in the online space. You have to try to go beyond what your vertical is, because networking also, where we go wrong is that we just stick to the silo that we're in, which is great until we, somehow shift and don't have that career anymore and we don't know a single thing about anything else. So there's a huge next set of steps, which is really start developing a good network of people that matter to you. One other book to look at is Michael Port, Book Yourself Solid. Even if you're not going to become a consultant, Michael has some other good tactics in there for a better networking opportunity.
Fantastic.
And that's it.
And I suppose that links in very well with your free book challenge that you've recently launched, which I personally can't imagine doing, because I think I've gone through about 40 books this year already. So one day maybe I'll read enough books and I can narrow it down to 3. Well, thank you very much, Chris. Some fine words. I'm sure everyone watching will appreciate times 1,000. So Mr. and Mrs. Viewer, thanks for joining us. Chris, thanks for being here. And for me, well, I've not done too much, so I've just kind of pressed record, but thank you. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen, another session of the Purple Coffee Podcast at an end. A big thanks to you for being part of this, and a huge thanks to Chris for being part of the Success Mistake and the Purple Coffee Podcast. It means so much to have amazing people like him involved, and wow, what a great insight. If you didn't take something from that, I don't even know if you're a real person, because I took a lot from it and I've listened to it several times now, and each time I learn new stuff. It's great. But it's something that so many of us go through. Like I say, in the beginning, for good reasons or bad, we try to do too much. After all, if you place all your eggs in one basket and it doesn't work, you're left with nothing. So you need to try a few different things to see what works and take it from there. But if you find a few things working, well, then you don't want to give anything up. But after a while, people are confused as to who you are and what you bring to the table. This works sometimes when you're a big conglomerate and you have many divisions, but when you're a solopreneur or a small business or just starting out, having an identity is key. And I love Chris's approach of how it's taught him to have more intention into what he does. It's all about having that one message. And people know what Chris brings to the table now. In terms of where you can find out more about Chris and this podcast, I've created a page for this very episode. It's at bit.ly/purplecoffee24. There you'll be able to get to Chris's website, his Twitter, his Facebook and whatnot, as well as subscribe to the Purple Coffee Podcast. If you like to watch, I encourage you to follow the Vimeo channel. If you prefer to listen, I encourage you to subscribe to the iTunes one. And if you like emails sent to your inbox with information before everybody else, you got it. The email list is for you. Either way, reach out, let me know how you're doing, and if you've got any ideas on how to improve or new people you'd like to see on the Purple Coffee Podcast, be sure to get in touch. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. So until next time, keep it awesome, keep it brilliant, keep it yeah.